everyone, and welcome to another episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish. I'm your host, Grant Pemberton, and on today's episode, we're joined with a very special guest from the land down under. Ken, we've had a lot of guests from the land down under, and I know it's because you have an extensive history there. Would you remind me, before you introduce our guests, how many trips have you logged under your belt to Australia?
100 as of last year, and we're on deck for 101 coming up here in July of 2023. And I'll actually be going to our guests and his wife. They are co-pastors there. I'll be going to their church as part of that tour in July.
That's awesome. And probably to get like some sort of honorary citizenship or something like that. 101 trips to Australia is pretty, that's a lot.
Yeah,
so,
I wouldn't mind an honorary citizenship, but I don't want to give up my U.S. citizenship.
Yes.
Much as I love that country.
Yes. Well, why don't you introduce the guest for us today?
All right. Well, on the show today, we have Phil Mason, and we have had his wife, Maria, on the show in the past. So Phil and Maria Mason are the senior leaders of what used to be known as the New Earth Tribe. In the last few years, they've shortened the name simply to Tribe. It's based in Byron Bay, which is the easternmost point of land on the mainland of Australia. It also happens to be the New Age capital, I think, of the entire country. Phil and Maria together have had extensive ministry in multiple sectors of what I might call renewal stream Christianity. And I thought today we would talk with Phil a bit about the breadth of the ministry they have, because I think sometimes they get buttonholed. One of the things that they've done a lot of is work among New Agers, ministering in New Age fairs and things, but what they do goes way, way, way beyond that. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for people to get a better sense of who really are Phil and Maria Mason. But today we're focusing specifically on Phil. Phil, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thanks so much, Ken. Nice to meet you too, Grant.
So let's get started with just kind of a simple background on you. Tell us how you came to faith, and ultimately you made it into the ministry. How did all of that develop? I think one of the things our listeners were very interested in is how does one, having become a Christian, how do they discern the calling of God?
Well, I was deeply entrenched in New Age spirituality, counterculture, and heavy drug use in lots of different forms in the late 70s. And then in late 1979, the Lord began moving on my life, and I had a series of encounters with believers. I had a good friend that I would bump into in my travels because I did travel around a lot. And I kept bumping into my friend Terry and in all sorts of places. And he was on the same journey to faith as I was. He was coming out of Australian Indigenous Aboriginal mysticism stuff and mixed in with the New Age. I was just pure New Age and a lot of drugs. And we bumped into each other and a lot. And so right at that time, I was just meeting Christians all the time. God was calling me. And I knew I could really sense the call of God on my life. I had a deep interest in spirituality, and I really wanted to know more about, Jesus. I had 3 Jesuses going on at the time. I had the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, which is a New Age iteration from 1901 by a guy called Levi Dowling. Very New Age kind of Jesus. Then I had the Essene Gospel of Peace by a guy named Edmund Bordeaux Zalecki, and that was like trying to depict Jesus as a New Age Essene mystic. And so then I had the biblical Jesus as well. And I was seriously confused. I mean, I didn't know which one was the real Jesus. But I had an encounter with the Lord that changed my life in late 1979. I was in a drug house, and there was one guy who was tripping on magic mushrooms in the other room. And he was just having a bad trip. No one knew what to do with the guy, but he was completely spun out in his bedroom. And we thought, oh, I guess he'll come out of it. And meanwhile, we had some Christians at the house visiting us and preaching the gospel to us. And next thing, we heard this commotion from the kitchen, and this young guy was overturning the kitchen table and chairs flying everywhere. And he was having an epic seizure, like a major seizure. And we came running into the room, and he was just convulsing violently, overturning all the furniture from his convulsions. And then he went completely motionless, and there were no vital signs whatsoever. He was dead. He went blue. Someone said, call an ambulance. So I was this skinny little fast runner, 19 years old. I said, I'll go. And I ran down to the nearest phone booth, called the ambulance, and raced back to the house, by which time the Christians who were there visiting providentially raised the guy from the dead. And I came back into the house, and he's sitting there in his right mind, no longer tripping on mushrooms, completely normal, but with furniture all over the place. And everyone in the room was like, this is a miracle. They were all praising God. People were weeping. And then the ambulance knocks at the door. I'm like, oh, dang, I have to go and say, I'm the guy who called you, which I did. And I said, look, this guy was blue. I tell you, he was blue. There were no vital signs. Anyway, they came in, they took him away, and then they brought him back a couple of hours later and said, this guy's perfectly fine. We can't find anything wrong with him at all. He was completely, resurrected from the dead and totally restored. And the next weekend I got baptized and been following Jesus ever since. So I got saved on a miracle.
I was just going to say, so you got saved because you saw a miraculous, literally a resurrection from the dead. But just a moment ago, just a few seconds ago, you made a comment about the ambulance guys brought him back, and he'd been raised from the dead. Did they actually acknowledge that he had been raised from the dead?
I don't know. They may have heard some of the guys in the house testifying and telling the story. I mean, all the guys were testifying to what had just happened. Whether they believed it or not, they didn't see it happen. They just saw him fully restored and in his right mind. I mean, I saw him 1 minute, he was blue and he was dead, and we couldn't find a pulse. And when I got back within, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, he was completely back to normal. So anyway, that had a huge impact on me. It was the final straw. I'd already been hearing the gospel message, and then so I came to Jesus and got baptized the next weekend. Came out of the water speaking in tongues, and got radically filled with the Holy Spirit. And that was now 43 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it's interesting. Have you seen the Jesus Revolution yet? Is it out in Australia?
It doesn't get released until April 20. So we've just got to be patient. And
okay.
I've seen the trailer for it, and I'm hanging out to see it, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, the reason I'm asking is there is a scene in the movie where one of the, not central characters, but somebody who at that stage of the movie you become accustomed to seeing in the various scenes and whatnot that are going on, and that person overdoses and then comes back. Now, it isn't completely clear if they simply overdosed and somehow made it through, or if they were in fact raised from the dead, as in your case here. But either way, it's a remarkably similar kind of a story, and it has a similarly dramatic kind of impact on the people who are around it. And I would just say, I think watching anybody die, if you've ever had that, I don't know what to say, experience, I don't know, opportunity is not the right word. If you've ever watched anybody die, it's a gruesome and horrifying thing. And you really do realize that when the Lord gave the warning in Eden, don't eat of this tree, for in the day you do, you will die. It may not have been as immediate as most of us might think it seems to indicate. But when you see death actually laying hold fully and completely on anybody in any manner that it does it, it's a shocking and terrifying thing. And that's why so many people are afraid of death. But to then see somebody come back from the dead, I mean, I could see why that would absolutely blast you out of your drug world and your new age world into like, I'm going after this.
Yeah.
Talk a little more about that, Phil. Have you ever used that as the frontispiece in any of your evangelistic efforts? I mean, you do a lot of evangelism and you've been preaching for years and years and years. How do you use that kind of experience, but I was going to say also information set to try to persuade people who don't believe in Jesus to come to faith?
Reminds me of that saying that a man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument.
Yeah.
No, man with an argument is other way around.
A man with an argument is always at the mercy of a man with an experience.
Yeah, I have used the testimony on many occasions, and I use it for shock value. You know, I mean, it's a shocking testimony. I mean, I know the guy was dead. I mean, everyone in that room was like, the guy's dead. I mean, you know, he's died. And it was intense. And so I have used it. Yeah, in certain situations. Absolutely. It's part of my journey to faith. And so it's a very significant story for me personally.
Yeah. And when you've done that, how have people tended to respond to that?
Shock. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, almost like cross-examining me. Are you sure about that? You sure that really happened?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, absolutely certain. I said, and so were all the people who were in the room, who were raising their hands and praising God and walking into walls and bumping into each other and crying in each other's arms. And I mean, I saw another miracle very soon after that, where a guy was in a car accident, and he had a head-on crash with another car on a blind corner, and he had a giant steel toolbox full of tools in the back of his vehicle. And the impact caused the steel toolbox to be airborne and fly into the back of his neck. And he came to our house because the accident happened right near the house I was in at the time. And he came in the door looking for a telephone to ring an ambulance, because he said, I've got this, something's happened to my neck. I've just been in this crash. He said, I'm in, level 10 pain. And so we were having a meeting with a bunch of Christians. And so we just said, can we pray for you? Can we lay hands on you? So this girl gets up and she puts her, he said, don't touch me. I'm in so much pain. He had a thing on the back of his neck like this. I mean, it's like, you see that kind of lump there. Something was sticking out like a collarbone. It hadn't perforated the skin, but it was dislocated and it looked pretty gnarly. And so we gathered around him and we prayed, and we literally heard snap. It snapped back into position and just went from that to just perfectly flat.
Wow.
And he was like, what the, with expletives, and he was just blown away. He burst into tears. We all burst into tears. And honestly, for the next 20, 30 minutes, we were walking around the room crying in each other's arms, and just what just happened. We heard it and we saw it, and it was the glory of God. So that was pretty powerful as well.
Amazing.
Those kinds of experiences mark you for life. I mean, it was just this young kid. I just turned 19, and that marked me for life. So by the grace of God, I've been following Jesus ever since.
Yeah. Amen. Wow. Well, okay. So you've been following Jesus, and somehow you followed him into the ministry. When did all that start? How did that start, et cetera?
I had to extricate myself from the cannabis culture that I was pretty deeply enmeshed in the city of Adelaide, which is the city of my birth in South Australia. And so I had to get out of that scene, because I just had so many friends that were trying to pull me back into drugs. So I intended to go to far north Queensland. That was my plan. So I was hitchhiking up the east coast of Australia. I had a cousin who I knew in the same culture that I was a part of in Adelaide. And she said, oh, if you're coming through, make sure you come and stay. And that's actually the house where that miracle happened with the guy with the toolbox in the back of the head. Happened at her house. So I stumbled upon their house late one night on my way north to far north Queensland, which I never got to far north Queensland. I became part of a community in the Byron Bay region that only had about 30 Christians in it. And I ended up staying there. The Lord spoke to me very clearly and just told me to stay and submit myself to the leadership and figure out which was the true Jesus. And that was part of the journey back then, trying to figure out, which one it was. The pastor actually said to me, so Phil, you've got these three Jesuses, right? So which one do you think, in your heart of hearts, do you think is the real Jesus? And I said, well, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm pretty convinced it's the one in the Bible. He said, well, why do you think that? New Testament Jesus. I said, well, that's Jesus in the New Testament warns about false Christs. And he's the only one who warns about false Christ. The others, maybe they're the false Christs. And he was like, yep, well, you're right. So anyway, that's straight. And I became part of that community. There was 30 people when I joined it. 1.5 years later, there were 300 people. When it peaked, it reached about 600 people. And that's all in the space of about 3 years. So extraordinary growth. It was Australia, to the best of my knowledge, it was Australia's Jesus Revolution. It was the equivalent of what was happening on the West Coast of the United States. Definitely not as big in scale, but certainly when you have 600 people coming to Christ over a couple of years, baptisms going on all the time, discipleship classes, Bible studies, outreaches. Immediately I was activated in evangelism with my friend Terry, who I contacted. I said, Terry, you've got to come up and see what God's doing here. This is incredible. He came, he joined, a whole bunch of his friends, an entourage from where he lived, came and joined. We had entourages of people from Melbourne, from Adelaide, from Brisbane. People just converged on the place. So there was transfer growth, but there was primarily new believers coming to Jesus. And so there was an explosion that happened here in the region where we are, and that was in the early 80s. And we were leading people to the Lord. We're going into New Age festivals. We were bringing dozens of people back to our community. I mean, it was an exciting time. That's why I'm really looking forward to seeing the Jesus Revolution film. I've spoken to a lot of people who said they just wept from start to finish. It just touched them so deeply. And I know I'm going to be one of those people because it kind of resonates with the culture that the Lord brought me out of. And I'm very excited to see the film. So, yeah, that's what we were swept up in that. And I got totally free of drugs through prayer, and went on to, arrived in that community in May 1980. My wife, Maria, she arrived there in March 1981. So we met in March 81. We got engaged in September 82 and married in October 83. So we're about to have our 40th wedding anniversary in October. We got 4 beautiful kids, 3 beautiful grandkids. And so the rest is history, I guess.
Well, it does go to show that the Lord blesses and he adds no sorrow to it, does he?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's pretty amazing history. I look back over it and just think, what a great experience. I mean, I was saved through a miracle. I was, introduced very early on to an on-fire community of people who were switched on. It was a Pentecostal church. Miracles were happening all over the place. Some phenomenal miracles. I was immediately activated in signs and wonders. I was healing. Jesus through me, obviously, was healing the sick everywhere I was going, to seeing healing breaking out. Here's the weird thing. I didn't continue in that. I got redirected into Bible studies because I just immersed myself in the Word when I first met Jesus. And I guess I knew a little bit more about the Bible than all these other kids who are getting saved. And so I started doing Bible studies, tons of Bible studies, and getting activated in Bible teaching. And so I actually let go of the pursuit of the signs and wonders thing. And it took until 2003, 4, 5, 6, around then, sitting under Bill Johnson's ministry, actually, here in Australia, when Bill Johnson first started coming out in 2003, hearing all the stories. And then I think it was 2006, we got radically reactivated in signs and wonders. And that opened up a whole new spectrum of ministry.
Now, I'm going off script here from what I had planned to ask you, but given the timeline you've just described for us, you had you had a history with the Vineyard movement in Australia before Bill Johnson came out in the early 21st century. John Wimber died in 1997. So, he came shortly before his death, but he was certainly not coming after 97. So how did you go from being a vineyard guy who would have had a signs and wonders bent, and before that, arguably an even more profound and radical signs and wonders bent following your conversion, to, I'll say, flatline with regard to signs and wonders and just another Bible guy, and then getting pulled back into that with Bill? I mean, you gave us a little bit of it here, but unpack that a bit for us, because there will be people on this who are listening to this podcast who are themselves just struggling to come into signs and wonders, or who may be wondering, is this all just hype? Maybe I should lay it down. There'll be various people in stages of either exit or re-entry. And you just said a mouthful about your own journey. So what can you share that will help those people who are trying to re-enter or who are thinking about exiting?
I think probably framing it around the devil's opposition to signs and wonders is so fierce that he will do anything he can to distract people away from that. Now, I was distracted away from that in the early 80s. I mean, definitely it was happening, but I know I didn't actively pursue it, and I inadvertently allowed other things to eclipse that and take its place. And it just wasn't forefront in my thinking. I was just so swept up in studying theology. I mean, we ended up leaving the Northern Rivers region, which is the region I live in now, and we went down to Adelaide. I did a theology degree. I mean, theology was my world. It still is. I love theology, but it became the sum total of what I was about, I guess. And I did allow all of that to just slide. Even coming into the vineyard, all the talk about signs and wonders, I was 100% for it, but we were not having a great deal of success, praying for the kids in the middle of the night while they were throwing up, headaches and stuff. We weren't even having much success with that, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
And it literally just slipped away from the forefront. The church that we were in Adelaide, where we went back to Adelaide, wasn't really moving in signs and wonders either, even though it was a vineyard church. I think every now and again you'd hear an amazing story, but it really was sitting under Bill in 2003 when he started talking about all the miracles that were happening, and that reawakened that passion in me. And so I started pursuing it and praying more for people, but still didn't really see a major breakthrough till 2006. And that's a good part of our story, because in 2006, we were running a Bible school, and midway through the class, actually, where do I start? Yeah, I'll start there, because this is a good story to tell. It was 2006. I was teaching a class, and this girl on our staff interrupted our class, and she said, "You've got to come outside and have a look at this. There's a sign in the heavens above us." And we went outside. The entire sky was blanketed in that high altitude white blanket, just a white blanket. But there was this portal in the sky, like an oval shaped portal, and what looked like an angel descending through the portal. It was all a cloud. It's called a punch hole cloud. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but they're a meteorological phenomena. And so there's a natural explanation for it, but it looked like an angel descending through a portal. We were totally blown away. And the next meeting we had, the next Sunday gathering, we had an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And that outpouring has ebbed and flowed ever since 2006, sometimes with incredible intensity and incredible waves of deliverance and so on. So it was in that year that we got activated. I went over to Bethel Church in California, and I got singled out, and they prophesied over me. And they prophesied that there was about to be a crossing over from Redding, California, to where this man is standing, whoever he was. She didn't know who I was. This woman was prophesying. I believe it was Chris Valton's secretary. And so she starts prophesying over me that there's this crossing over from Redding to where this man stands in Australia. And she said, there's going to be signs in the heavens, weather patterns changing as a sign that you are about to step into an outpouring of signs and wonders. I came back from that. I shared that with our team, and And immediately we went to our second major New Age festival that we were doing in Sydney. The first one was like July that year. The second one was November. So I'd just come back from this Leaders Advance in Redding, California. I came back, I played the prophecy to them about this incredible shift in weather patterns as a sign. And we went to that festival almost a week later and stepped into an incredible signs and wonders anointing that just fell on us. And during that festival, there was this Antarctic blast of air that came up from the south. So this is mid-November in Sydney. Now, that time of year, normally you're starting to get quite a lot of heat in Sydney. And there was this cold blast that came up from the south. And it was extreme. I mean, it was really, really cold. There was snow all the way up into Queensland. Now, I don't know if that means anything to you with, Australian geography, Ken, but that's, the bottom edge of Queensland. It's unusual to get snow up that far north. It was a cold blast. And it was, the woman prophesied polar opposites. And there was something on the newspaper the next day in Sydney to say that this was like absolute opposite of what you normally expect this time of year. And so there was the sign right there. It happened immediately. And we stepped into a strong signs and wonders anointing in 2006. And
okay. I found this on the web for Strong Science. Check it out.
Siri just picked up what you were saying and is talking. Let me shut her up. Thanks funny. For nothing, Siri.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So weird. Very weird. Okay, anyway, we can edit that out. Keep going. This is an amazing story.
Oh, yeah, we stepped into a really powerful signs and wonders anointing, and I was up on the main stage at this big New Age festival, and I was ministering a word of knowledge, and I said, is there somebody here who's recently had a serious car accident, and you've got you're wearing you've had a neck injury, what they call that? I should know the term. Where your neck has been injured. And
okay.
this person puts their hand up on the back row of this group of people, about maybe 50, 60 people sitting there, and we're doing ministry from the main stage. And this person put their hand up and said, that's me. And I said, well, I release the healing energy of Christ into your neck right now, and I command your neck to be healed. Well, instantly, boom, this person's neck was healed. And just moving their head around, and the person next to them thought they were joking. They're like, come on, this can't be happening. He said, no, for real, my neck's completely healed. And there was just a whole string of healings that happened. And that was the second festival outreach that we did. We've now done over 50 festival outreaches, and we've seen over 15,000 miracles. And we're very cautious not to exaggerate. We've seen about 15,000 or more healings, but we only count the ones where we see the evidence of the healing on the spot, not waiting to hear testimonies back from, in 2 weeks' time, or how the person felt when they got out of bed the next morning. It was more a case of we just count the ones where people testified to being instantly healed. So we've seen an explosion of signs and wonders in the New Age marketplace, and it's been one of the most challenging fields of ministry that we've done, but it's also been one of the most tremendously fruitful. And we've seen hundreds of people come to Christ over the years. And that began in 2006. So 2006 was a very pivotal year for us. But I've jumped way ahead. I mean, we planted the church in 1998, and it was a vineyard church. We were the 12th vineyard in Australia. We were the first second-generation vineyard church. So there was 11 churches adopted by John into the vineyard movement, and we wanted to plant, but John said to me, well, you need to go and immerse yourself in one of these 11 vineyards, even if you have to move. We didn't, fortunately. We didn't have to move. We were in Adelaide, and there was a vineyard church there, so we jumped in on that. And a year later, or actually less than a year, Bob and Margie Crane, who you probably know from the old vineyard days, happened to be there on the day that we were being commissioned and being sent out. And Bob went into an open vision and saw the township where we were going to be meeting, or where we were going to plant the church. He saw it. He said, I'm seeing like a roundabout, and then the road goes due west from there. No, it's actually west-northwest. And he said, I see you in a house out there, and every street is named after trees. And that's exactly where we ended up, just outside of town, west-northwest. I mean, he had a vision and to see exactly where we were going. So we were sent out and we planted a vineyard. Eventually, without wanting to go into this particular story, we moved on from being in the vineyard, and that's when we became New Earth Tribe. And back then, in 1998, we were targeting the New Age community, because Byron Bay is probably one of the most hectic New Age strongholds in Australia, and so we felt like the Lord had mandated us to reach out to that particular target group. So that's why we called ourselves New Earth Tribe. Raised a lot of eyebrows for people. New Earth Tribe in Byron Bay. It really had some scary connotations for some people. They probably thought we were a total cult or something. But anyway, we didn't name that for the sake of the church. We named it for the sake of the target group. And, we've obviously led loads of people to the Lord over the years, and it's been exciting. But we changed our name. On our 18th birthday, we changed it to Tribe Byron Bay. And we're actually contemplating changing it completely to Tribe Church. Because we're no longer anchored to Byron Bay. We've become a regional church that's spread out over a pretty vast region, really. So, so we're kind of a regional church. So everyone calls us Tribe, so we'll just go with that, I think.
I never had any, I liked the name when you were the New Earth Tribe. When I first became acquainted with you and Maria, I loved it. And I could certainly see why people might get the heebie-jeebies thinking that it's somehow new agey, but the scripture does speak of a new heavens and a new earth. And given the fact that, how do I say this succinctly? Because this is really your interview, not mine. But John Wimber always used to say, churches are tribal in nature. And a lot of people don't understand that, but that's part of the fundamental sociology of churches. And so one of the things that goes on in a tribe, and in Western society, not much is left of tribalism. But one of the things that goes on in tribe is this interconnected community, this mutual support, but also a mutual shared story, a shared language, shared cultural norms. And so they bond together very deeply. So when I heard New Earth Tribe, I thought, okay, there's a new heavens and a new earth. And this is a group of people who are formed together as a Christian tribe, who are trying to live out some earthly expression of what will become more fully manifest in the future, or something like that. Anyway, you could nuance it a bit, but bottom line, that's kind of where my thinking went with it. So I never had any, I thought it was just a very cool name. So it's interesting that we're having this conversation, and you mentioned that for some people it was kind of a scary name, because I never had any fear about it at all.
Yeah, that's good. Some people may have had kids in our church, and who you hear the stories of kids running away to Byron Bay and getting caught up in some weird New Age cult. So there might have been some legitimate reasons why they might have at least wanted to find out a bit more about what we believe, and just natural hesitancy.
And does the leader of the tribe still believe in the Aquarian Jesus?
Right. Well,
yeah.
Look, it had a shelf life. I think our target group broadened, and we realized, we weren't just here for the local community. We've got a far more sort of broader reach within the nation now, I guess. We've opened up some other, theaters of ministry that have broadened out our sphere of influence in the nation, on the nations. And it just seemed right to on our 18th birthday to tweak the name a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So, your sphere of ministry has expanded, and you've got the church still, but you've got a training center. You're mentoring people. You're leading a movement, Heart Sync. You've got some other things that are Heart Revolution, I guess. But anyway, tell us about all of these various other things that you're now doing, because I think many times people wonder, how does ministry develop in the life of an individual, or in your case, a couple? And what are some of the other dimensions of ministry where the Lord might lead you that are still consistent with the authentic apostolic gospel?
Great question. Well, Obviously, the early days, the focus was largely evangelism to our region. That expanded to evangelism into all these New Age festivals all over Australia. But then we also started the Byron Bay Healing Rooms, and that's been a really powerful ministry that's been going since about 2006 as well. And then in 2003, we began a ministry training school, which back then we called the Deep End School of the Supernatural. And so it was the Deep End School that eventually morphed into what we called Naoth College. Now, Naoth being Naoth of Ramah, where Samuel had his school of the prophets in Naoth. And so we called it Naoth College. And that ran for a number of years. So we ran 9-month Bible training courses from 2003 to 2017. It stopped in 2017 because there was a change in government policy, and we were getting some government funding for our students. And all of that just collapsed with some change in government policy. So we haven't actually run full-time 9-month schools since about 2017. So now all we do is just run online courses at the moment, or local courses that we run. So that's kind of the sum total of that. And I think what do we call that? Tribe Ministry School, I think we've been calling that. So that's that arm of it. I mean, with Maria and I both have a training and equipping ministry. We were, I think, very well trained in the vineyard. We had a lot of vineyard trainers who came out to Australia for this sort of emergent vineyard and movement that was starting here in Australia back in the mid-90s. We used to get so much training. It was wonderful. And we got, really committed to, kingdom ministry. And I know I sat under your ministry, Ken, all the way back in 94, November 94 in Melbourne. I did a 4-part seminar under you on deliverance, which was fantastic and life-changing. And so we were all about kingdom ministry, and all of our teaching ministry has always been anchored to training people in kingdom ministry. And that continues on, but just not in the same form that it had been from 2003 till around 2017. So we're very focused on equipping the saints, training in kingdom, getting people out there doing the stuff. And we attribute so much of that to activation within the vineyard. I mean, the real activation in signs and wonders, as I said, came through Bethel Church. But yeah, no, we were already activated in deliverance and in inner healing and the prophetic, but we hadn't had breakthrough in physical healing until 2006. But one ministry that the Lord has led us to develop, which has turned into a small m movement, is what you mentioned before, Heart Revolution. And that's turned into running seminars and training events all over Australia. And Heart Revolution, to try and succinctly describe that ministry, it is essentially a father's heart stream. So it's very much like an inner healing, deep level emotional healing through encountering the Father's love. So nothing new there. But we've put the accent on the heart paradigm. And our point is that it's Jesus' heart revolution. It's not ours. He launched a heart revolution, which is a movement from outward appearance and performance to transformation of the heart. And, Jesus himself prophesied that there would be 4 general ways in which people would respond. Matthew chapter 13, the sower and the seed, outright cancellation of Jesus, piquing people's intellectual curiosity, maybe being the second group. The third group, people who want to take the teachings of Jesus more seriously and want to try and absorb some of his teachings and do their best to follow him, but have a big struggle because of the pull of the world and the cares of this life. And then the fourth group is a group that, really receive the fullness of that word sown into their hearts and allow it to take root and go on to bring a harvest of 30, 60, or 100-fold. And that's clearly what Jesus wants. And so the Heart Revolution message is really about giving Jesus what he wants, which is a wholehearted devotion where we allow him to bring deep level healing into our lives. And also deliverance is a major part of that as well, because, obviously the demons ride on the back of people's emotional brokenness, whether it's shame or depression or anxiety or fear or lust or whatever it might be. These are emotional problems and addictions that people have. And, the enemy loves to ride on the back of that stuff. So the Heart Revolution ministry is very much anchored to deliverance as well. So it's heart transformation, deep level inner healing, emotional healing, and deliverance. So that's kind of what that ministry is all about. To us, it's just normative New Testament, apostolic, first century Christianity. But getting back to that, and I know that the Vineyard really got us on the right path with all of that, with the Kingdom ministry focus.
Yeah, I think the Vineyard laid some essential foundations, back in the day, as we say. But, I've had conversations with, her name is now Wong because she remarried after John died. But Carol Wimber is how most people would still think of her, John's wife at the time. And I've had conversation with her, and she has made the comment that what she and John established and gave to all of us who were involved in the Vineyard in whichever way we were, she really views all of that as kind of 1.0 version, depending on which facet of it we may be talking about. Much of this has grown and advanced. And I think really that's what everybody hopes will happen, is that whatever foundation is laid as a wise master builder, and of course I'm quoting Paul here, that it will ultimately be used as a good foundation to build an amazing structure on top of it. And what I continue to see going on through various dimensions of ministry, Bethel, of course, is one of them, but there are others around. IHOP brings a flavor to it. And there are some other ministries. Of course, Randy Clark carries on much of John's legacy as well because of his previous association with John and when John was alive. So we have these various parts of the body where, in many ways, I think we are operating with understandings that we didn't have back then. And in some ways, we see even greater breakthroughs than we did in those days. In other cases, the power was greater. So maybe the breakthroughs were greater in certain dimensions back then than they are today. And so maybe those parts we need to recover some of that former level of power and glory. But anyway, it's an amazing time to be alive. And, given that you haven't yet seen the Jesus Revolution movie, it would be interesting to have a comparison of notes once you have done that and talk about, okay, where do we need to catch up? Where do we need to bring up what once was? And how do we go forward from here to make it even better than it ever could have been?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you've got all these different things that you're doing. Tell us, people don't maybe want to talk about these things always, or they gloss over them, but of the various things you've done with the Lord and in ministry, what have you found most satisfying, and what's been the most challenging to you?
Well, for me personally, obviously pioneering a church that is coming up to its 25th anniversary in November has been probably our greatest blessing, to see the Lord sustain that ministry over 25 years. The ministry into the New Age for me has been tremendous because it's getting ministry out into the wider community. It's getting kingdom out of the church environment, out into the marketplace. And so to move in signs and wonders to the degree that we have has, for me, looking back over the history of my journey with the Lord up to this date, been the most gratifying thing for me personally, to be an eyewitness and a participant in such a high-level outpouring of the supernatural in a sustained way. I mean, for being when we run a booth inside these festivals, and we've done 50 or more festivals, and when you're in the booth ministering, there's an endless stream of people coming in, because what we offer is free. What everyone else offers, they put a door charge on it, whether it's psychic readings or the other New Age stuff that people do. They charge for it, but ours is free. So we've got an endless stream of people coming through. And literally, we are just people processing. People come in, we find out what their condition is, we pray, people get healed. Like, you are watching healings happening all day long when you're in there. And it's just extraordinary. I mean, I remember one of the things that Bill Johnson said that is one of the missing factors in many church environments, he says miracles are our tutor. And it's a really profound thought, because for Jesus with his disciples, they were witnessing miracles daily and all day. And so those miracles were training them to think from the unlimited resources of heaven. And it was deeply transformational for them, and probably can explain to some extent the level of their success carrying the baton from the day of Pentecost forward. They didn't collapse in a heap and trip over their own feet and fall back into Judaism and legalism. They managed to sustain this move of God. They were deeply connected to the Lord. And it was partly because of the level of outpouring of signs and wonders that they saw. And so having experienced that, not just here in these festival outreaches, but also when we do our mission trips overseas, we just see some extreme miracles, like blind eyes open and deaf ears open. And I just feel like, for my life personally, miracles have been a tutor in my life, and it's deepened my faith in God, because there's a consistency. And I say to the team members that we take into these festivals who've never been in there before, you're going to see miracles all day long. And it's a huge privilege, because you're going to just be watching the Lord bringing healing on person after person. So that's, for me personally, has been tremendously gratifying. The bigger picture, planning the church, and we've had some tremendous outpourings of the Holy Spirit. I mean, we've really had some real moves of God, ebbs and flows, like many places, some sustained periods of just high-level outpourings of the Spirit and glory and signs and wonders and deliverance and stuff. And then, some of the drier seasons as well. So ebb and flow there. But I think, looking back, for me personally, having witnessed the supernatural to the extent that I have, I'd have to say that for me is probably the high water mark. And it was also very challenging too, to put ourselves in a situation, because we would minister on the main stage and I would run seminars in the festival. And those seminars were called Quantum Physics and the Supernatural Realm. And I'd give a little 20-minute talk on quantum physics, and which I use that as the science of heaven invading Earth, and I wrote a book about that called Quantum Glory. And so I'd give a little introductory talk on quantum physics, but I always say, now stick around, because we're going to do a demonstration at the end. And we have had a number, probably at least a dozen of those seminar teachings, where every single person in the room was supernaturally healed. Every person. To the point where I'm like, is there anybody left in this room with any pain anywhere in their body? Give me a wave. And it's been literally, they were all healed. And so those moments for me personally, looking back, have been the high water mark. They were all healed. And I mean, we all tumbled out of that seminar going, what just happened in there?
Yeah.
That was extreme.
It's funny. I've had times, not universally, but here and there, where pastors have challenged me on the assertion that 100% of the people got 100% healed. And I call it 100 by 100 healing. And I'm like, I'm not lying. I'm not kidding. It actually happens. Like, that never happens. That can't happen. And it certainly wouldn't happen in the Western world. So, it's hearing you say this, I'm like, yep. I've been there, and I get that. And I love it, because it just shows what's actually possible in God.
Absolutely. And, to put yourself on the line as well in the marketplace, in an unfriendly environment, and to do public miracles is probably the highest privilege of my life. To be up on that main stage, calling out words of knowledge, seeing people getting radically healed on the spot by the power of Jesus, to the point where the faith in the audience just lifts so much that we're like, well, the only way we're going to get everybody is we're going to do a healing tunnel right now. So line up over here, and we've got our team, and we're going to come through the tunnel, and we're going to lay hands on you. And we had one event in Melbourne where we had over 100 people healed walking through that tunnel. The glory of God was all over it. All these other people were trying to jump onto the lineup of people, but the organizers of the festival were saying, hey, we're closing in 20 minutes. This is like we were on the stage Hey, and they were saying to these people, you can't get on the line because we're not going to have enough time for all you people to go through. So we've had some healing explosions that have happened in very spectacular ways. And I think doing public miracles is next level again, because you're really putting yourself out there, doing in the public marketplace. So that was very exciting. So that's been a very, very gratifying experience for me personally. Challenge-wise, I mean, that was an expensive season of ministry. We haven't gone back in. Some friends of mine ran one of them the other day. I'm having a bit of a break from them at the moment because I did so many of them. It's been just nice off the back of the pandemic just to take a few years off, I'll be really honest. Bit of self-care and look after myself and get off the front line a little bit. Yeah, we raised over $250,000 just from donations to try and run that ministry. So it was a supernatural ministry. The Lord really sustained it. So that was a real high water mark. I mean, obviously the church, pioneering a church and watching it grow and watching so many people's lives being transformed. I mean, of course, that is also right up there with, you know, that same sort of sense of the highlight looking back.
Yeah, what an amazing testimony, though. I wish I could see the faces of some of the folks that will listen to this podcast, you know, whether when it drops or maybe in the weeks after that, if they pick it up off of YouTube, hearing these testimonies from you. I've told stories of this kind from the years of the Australian outpouring when I was traveling so heavily in Australia. And I will say, when I wrote my book that is coming out in June, even my publisher was questioning me about the veracity of the stories, looking for documentation. And this is a charismatic Christian publishing house. So I'm with you. And it's a real privilege to be somehow involved with all that with the Father. And you realize Jesus wasn't kidding when he said the Holy Spirit will be your tutor. He'll be your guide. He'll teach you everything you need to know. Because I won't be around. I've got to go. I've got to go back to the Father now. And so when you're standing there and these things are going on around you, it's both humbling, but you also feel incredibly privileged that you might be invited into such a thing.
I have to tell one quick story about the hardest moment that I ever experienced was when we're on the main stage and signs and wonders were breaking out. We were getting words of knowledge and people were getting healed. But I said, is there anybody here with a deaf right ear? And this guy from up the very back row was waving, and that's me, that's me. And what we were in the habit of doing was just releasing the healing presence of Jesus over people right where they were sitting. And so I said to this guy, look, just stand there. And I'm just going to release the healing energy of Christ. That's the language I use when I'm in that environment, energeo, Greek word for power. I'm going to release the healing energy of Christ, and I command your ear to open from a distance. Nothing happened. And I said, well, let's do it again. And nothing happened. Meanwhile, I'm sort of starting to go an unusual color of pink and started, feeling this heat in my face. I'm like, this is awkward because everyone's staring at you, right? Like I've got all the people sitting in the seats, but then around the area where we're doing the ministry, there's all these booths and they're all stopping and they're watching what's going on. And I said, okay, so I'm going to hand the microphone to our team and they're going to continue. I will come down and just place my hands on you. So all eyes are following me. They're tracking with me. And then I go down, I talk to the guy and I've got my hand on his ear. And I think I'm bright red by this moment. I'm like, this is hectic. Public miracle stuff. And I'm like, come on, Jesus, you've got to break through here. And I just waited. And the Lord spoke to me and said, only do what you see Jesus doing. Mm. And I said, in the name of Christ, I command this ear to open. And it just opened on the spot. And the guy, I don't remember what expletive came out, but he was blown away. He's like, whoa. He just instantly, the ear was open. And I went away from that thinking, wow, because I remember under John Wimber, he always used to say, only do what you see the Father doing.
Right.
And I was really frustrated by that because I was like, well, I don't know what the Father's doing. And how am I supposed to know? And when the Lord spoke that rhema word to me in my heart in that moment. Only do what you see Jesus doing. Immediately, everything just in my mind just realigned. I was like, of course, once you've seen what Jesus does, you've seen what the Father's doing. He only ever did what the Father's doing. And I just had this spirit of faith that came over me in that moment. And the guy was completely healed. So super exciting and but risky, like high risk.
Yeah. Well, Robbie Dawkins likes to say faith. Well, he picked it up from John Wimber, but Robbie has really popularized it in our time. Faith is spelled R-I-S-K. And so then he'll say, crank up the risk. Yeah. And you'll see God do more, basically, is where he likes to go with that. So I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now, so you've got a new book that's coming out. Tell us a little bit about your new book.
Okay. Well, it's book number 9. And so I've got 8 that are out already. And the 9th one is called The Upgrade in the Upper Room. And I'm particularly excited about it. And to try to describe it, obviously, it's a focus on the upper room and Jesus' teachings in the upper room. But if you look at John chapter 13 and verse 1, at the very beginning of that introduction to the upper room, John is just describing all that's happened up to this point. And in the New International Version, John 13:1, it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The Passion Translation picks up on that. And it says, having loved his own who were in the world, or he loved them deeply, but now he wanted to show them the full measure of his love. And so the book is looking at what the upgrade was in the upper room in Jesus revealing the full measure of his love. What is the full measure of the love of the Father revealed through Jesus? And it's obviously a deeper experience of adoptive love, because I believe that Jesus was ministering adoptive love for the entire 3 years of his ministry. So that adoptive love wasn't so new, but there was much more language about the Father in the upper room. And he also said, I won't leave you as orphans. And so this whole sort of orphan to son paradigm is introduced. And so it's definitely an upgrade to a new level of adoptive love in the upper room, but it was also an outpouring of covenantal love, which in Hebrew, that word is chesed. It's a unique word. 250 times roughly it appears in the Old Testament. Chesed, it can be just translated love or steadfast love or unfailing love or loving kindness. But chesed is a description of the nature of God's love, because it's sometimes translated as covenant love or loyal love. And so chesed is a descriptor of the nature of ahav or ahava, which is the Hebrew word for love. So there is a standard Hebrew word for love, but chesed is a description of the love of God. Love that leads to covenant, love that leads to loyalty. And so that's what the upper room was all about. Jesus entered into a covenant, and that was an expression of his love. And of course, laying his life down the next day was the greatest expression of love in human history, but also attachment love. And so I talk a lot in the book about attachment love as an expression of John 15, abiding in the vine. We're called to abide in the vine or make our home in the vine. I think the message says, make your home in my love. Abide in the vine, make your home in the vine.
Yeah,
and it's about attachment. It's about vital attachment, so that there is a life flow happening. Yeah. And so I bounce off a little bit of attachment theory and talk a little bit about the whole science of attachment, and especially in the light of brain science and what cutting-edge neuroscience community are now saying about attachment, and how there's parts of our brain that process attachment. But of course, when people get broken along the journey, a lot of times they become avoidant and they lose their capacity to form meaningful attachments in their life. But what Jesus is saying in John 15, he's inviting us into a deep level attachment with the Father and with himself and with one another. And he actually says that he said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. And this is my command, that you love one another. And so if you look at that through the lens of attachment, it's like our capacity to attach to one another is reflective of our capacity to build an attachment with Jesus and with the Father. And so we're actually called to be attached, not just to the vine, but to the branches. And so that is the formation of deep level community, which leads into the prayer of Jesus in John 17, that they may be one, even as you and I are one. So I kind of reframe the upper room as a threshold that the Lord is calling all believers to step into that threshold and live within the upper room paradigm of the outpouring of the Father's love, the deepening of that in our hearts and the healing that comes from the Father's love, but also stepping into the revelation of covenant love, the hesed of God, his covenant loyalty to us and his love. And so I subtitled the book, The Birthplace of Apostolic Community. And my contention is that the language that Jesus presented in the upper room was so unique in comparison to the rest of the body of Jesus' teachings that it was clearly a threshold moment that he was calling them to step into. And he was giving them the language and the framework for how they would be able to endure persecution, which is John 16. And so through the depth of their connection with Christ, with the Father, with the experience of his love and a deepening attachment to God and to one another, that would get them through the hard times. And so it really was the birthplace of apostolic community. So I'm pretty excited about the book. It's hard when you're an author because I've nearly written 2 other books subsequent to that. And so I'm plowing ahead because I'm just getting a lot of revelation at the moment. So I'm sort of writing a lot of stuff. I'm waiting to get that one released, and I'm hoping that it will get released sort of maybe around middle of this year, 2023. So yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Tell us the title again, because I'm sure, having heard what you just said, a lot of our listeners are going to want to either pre-order it or, write it down for order once it's out in print. Tell us the name one more time so they can get it.
It's called The Upgrade in the Upper Room.
The Upgrade in the Upper Room.
Birthplace of Apostolic Community.
There we go. All right. So phenomenal book. By the way, I know I owe you my endorsement, but I've looked through it already. So, won't be long in coming. I've just been pretty backed up, as you know. All right. So we got just a couple more questions and then we'll close it out. This is a longer podcast, but back on the topic of outpourings and awakenings and, some of the revival type movements that you've been involved with over the years. There's outpourings going on all across the United States on college campuses, in churches, public places. And I know because of our offline communication when we're not doing a podcast, this has affected your own community there in Byron Bay. Your church has been impacted by this. What does that look like? How are you managing or stewarding or leading, shepherding that move of the Spirit right now in real time in Byron Bay? And one other thing related to it, you're at the time in life where many people start to downshift, maybe think about retirement or whatever. Is this affecting your current thinking and planning for the future?
Lots of questions.
They're all related to that one outpouring question, though.
Yeah, well, as soon as we heard about what was happening in Asbury University, we were like, Lord, pour it out over here. Of course. I mean, that's every pastor's dream to see, spirit of revival fall upon the church. And we have had some great seasons where there's been some real significant outpouring. So we're hungry for that. And we also feel a mandate to pray right here in this location, most easterly point of Australia, to set up a house of prayer and pray in a powerful move here in Australia. So we're like, Lord, send it here. So the first big gathering that we had after we'd first heard of Asbury, we immediately sensed a major upshift in presence and deliverance. And so all our meetings subsequent to that first meeting, after we first heard about what's happening it was happening in Asbury, we've experienced an increase of presence, an increase of deliverance. And the ministry times at the end have been super powerful. Tons of people going through deliverance, tons of people rededicating their lives. We've had unsaved people coming in, confessing their sins, crying out. I don't want to make it sound greater than it is. It's small stuff compared to some of the bigger stuff that's happening around the world. But for any pastor, like I said, it's tremendously exciting just to see that spike in the intensity of the presence and the manifestations of repentance, people crying out to God, confessing their sins out loud, and going through deliverance. So it's been tremendously exciting. We've been thrilled to see an upshift. And, everywhere we're going at the moment, there's just deliverance breaking out. We are seeing deliverance going everywhere at the moment. Like even yesterday, we went to a 72-hour prayer meeting. We closed out the last couple of hours of that prayer meeting. And again, there was an outbreak of deliverance at the end. So yeah, that's definitely something that just says to me that there's an increase of power, and the power of God is showing up, and it's resulting in spontaneous deliverance.
Yeah. Do you remember when I was coming out in the last decade to Australia? Bad grammar. Coming out to Australia in the last decade there, that's better grammar. But anyway, when I was coming out, and in those years, my God Is Not a Theory group was a really active clearinghouse for all kinds of ideas and reports on what was going on and key learnings and all that. And I put in there that there was coming a great, massive outpouring of deliverance. It was coming like a tidal wave to hit the earth. Well, I was a few years ahead of my time, I guess, but here we are. It's happening now. And, we have this new movie that's coming out in the US, or has come out, called by the title, Come Out. And it features a guy out of Nashville named Greg Locke. And I think Grant has some sort of a relationship with him or knows of him or something. So we've got that going on in movie theaters. And of course, Catherine Crick is somebody that people are aware of. She's developed a big social media presence. But there are other people that I know about, all of whom are seeing this huge upsurge in not just the intensity of deliverance, but I would say the profundity of deliverance, such that people are getting well and truly free of stuff that's harassed them for years. And it's just an indication, again, that the kingdom of God is breaking in. This is a season of visitation. And as I have been preaching just the last 6 or 7 weeks, in February of 2023, the earth crossed a line of demarcation from one state of nature to this newer state of nature. And we've seen it going on all in the month of March. Now, March is just 1 month, but there's no signs of it abating. It seems to be gathering steam and momentum. I'm not sure how long or how far or how powerful this thing's going to run, but everything you're reporting is consistent with everything else I saw in Europe last week and beyond that, kind of earlier when I first got there, to Germany and Austria. We're seeing it in the United States. It's just an amazing time to be alive. It's a very exciting time to double down on everything we believe about our faith and about our Lord.
Yep, I agree. And in answer to your last question, we have no plans of retirement. We are just getting excited about the future and pouring into the next generation and being right up front, close to the activity of what God's doing in the earth. So definitely no downshifting going on here. So we're just gearing up and super excited. Also, a lot more self-care these days, to be able to run and not grow weary, walk and not faint. I mean, obviously the Lord's training us in being able to sustain high output. I know you'd know all about that because you're a high output guy, but just to have the resilience to keep going on the front line. There's a skill set around that. And I think that we've been in training over the last few years around cultivating that skill set so that we can really maintain longevity and sustainability of being on the front line and not growing weary.
Yeah, well, and I think right with that, this is a time for those of us who are maybe in the next generation, the older generation, to really lean into those promises that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles and run and not grow weary and walk and not faint. Or to quote from a different passage of the scripture, he renews my youth like the eagles. And so I'm looking forward to not running out of steam over the next 20 years. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, Phil, listen, you've shared a lot today, and I'm sure some of our listeners, their heads are spinning and they're thinking, man, that guy's lived 4 lives and I want a piece of that. Would you pray over us as a listening audience that we could receive some impartation and be able to steward and honor the Lord with our lives the way you and Maria have, and pass it off to the next generation?
Amen. Well, Father, I do thank you, Lord, for anyone who's listening to this podcast or watching this live YouTube broadcast, Lord. We pray in the name of Jesus that you would impart greater passion for your kingdom, Lord. I pray for a passion for the kingdom ministry of Jesus, Lord, with signs, wonders, deliverance, prophecy, deep level heart healing, Lord. This heart revolution, Lord, that you are so passionate about, Lord. You launched it, you pioneered it 2,000 years ago, and you want all of us, Lord. You want our whole heart. And I pray, Lord, that you would have companies across the earth, Lord, who would bring an offering of wholehearted devotion to you in this hour, Lord, that we would be single-minded, and you would give us incredible grace, Lord, to sustain output as beloved sons and daughters, Lord. We would be loaded with capacity to bless and to pour out in the months and years ahead. Father, I pray a blessing over every person who's listening to this podcast. In Jesus' name, I pray that you would impart fiery passion and first love for you, Lord, and a capacity to be able to do it in a sustained way over the long haul. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, Phil, I can't thank you enough for not just being on the show, but for being so generous with your time, because we've run over considerably, but it just didn't seem right to cut it short in the midst of such a rich conversation. I really appreciate your being with us. Grant, do you have anything you want to add or say?
I mean, a lot, but it was all so good. So many different things I'm thinking about. I think the thing that stands out to me the most, as you said, the revelation of what we see Jesus doing is what he saw the Father doing. And that comparison and correlation, I'm going to be thinking about that for the next probably several weeks. So yeah, this has been awesome. And I can't wait to listen back to this because I know there's a lot that I need to retain that I missed. But thank you so much for taking time and sharing with us. And we look forward to, hopefully you'll come back and join us. And I think you've got some more stories that would be pretty interesting to hear as well. I don't think we heard all of them for sure. And Ken, thank you so much. I know that you're traveling and busy. And so thanks for making time for us and for doing this. And we want to thank you all for listening and for tuning in. And we'll be here right back here this time next week with another episode of God is Not a Theory with Ken Fish.
We've recently updated the Orbis Ministries app with Ken's free teaching archive. You can click on the link in the description of this podcast to download today.